Hey, so I'm going to be breaking down this fruit market shot I just did. This isn't going to be a step-by-step tutorial, but instead it's going to be a quick breakdown into how I build up my scenes and solve problems within those scenes. Also, if you want to know how you can get any of these fruits and vegetables for free, then definitely stick around. So, it all started when I was looking to create some sort of colorful and cinematic shot. And then I realized that food has a lot of color in it, and then I was thinking about markets and how they have a lot of food there. So I looked up some photos of fruit markets online and eventually gathered a collection of reference I liked that somewhat resembles this vision that I had in my mind. So again, please use reference, get any couple of image and then base your creative vision on that. So the first thing is to model the fruit stand, which is just a cube scaled down to match the proportions that you like. Selecting the face, insetting it, extruding it down, adding a couple of edge loops so that we can extrude these faces up, create mini stands. Then moving straight to texturing, I used a wood texture I found on textures.com, scale it down, cube project, and then it's all about just matching faces with what looks good in a texture. A good tip is with corners and edges, you always want to match it with dark spots and creases in the actual texture. And this will blend in the sharpness really well. Now, because this is a wooden stand, I'm going to be turning up the roughness, as well as adding in a bump node, plugging the texture map into the height, and then plugging that into the normal. And then we're going to get some pretty good looking bump. After angling the fruit stands, I continue to model the rest of the fruit stand table, which is just another cube, manipulating edges, adding edge loops, and extruding it so we can create this mini table where I'll be putting on baskets. Good tip with anything sharp is to select all the edges, and then with Control B, you want to bevel them just slightly to reduce any. Moving on to texturing the table base is pretty much the same thing, very simple, making things look nice, coming together. Duplicating these fruit stands so they resemble some sort of marketplace. Another huge tip for realism is to add a bunch of edge loops to these models, and then with proportional editing turned on, you want to be adding imperfections to the mesh by slightly pulling each bit up and down, rotating, adding imperfections. And we're doing this to emphasize the realism as well as to differentiate the repetition of these fruit stands next to each other. Now, on to making the fruits and vegetables that you see. I actually learned this from CGboost's beginner tutorial series on how to make this apple scene, and his video series actually goes into step by step on each of the techniques used, such as organic modeling, texture painting, and setting up materials. All of my fruits and vegetables were based on the same concept, and if you want a more beginner friendly step by step tutorial on this principle, then definitely check out CGboost's beginner series. And you know what, because I'm such a nice guy, I'm going to be giving out all the fruits and vegetables that I used in my final render for free, just in case someone doesn't want to bother making every single one of them. And yeah, there's 13 different types of food. You're going to be getting cherries, kiwi, red apples, green apples, onions, white onions, potatoes, green, yellow, red peppers, cabbages, cucumbers, and carrots. Because as simple as it is to make them, they do take time, so you're welcome. Link to that file will be in the description. Anyways, I started with making the apple because that's what I learned first. Reduce the segments a lot because we want as little geometry as possible. With a little bit of shade smooth, we're ready to use the proportional editing tool again to bring down the shape of the sphere into more of an apple. Then adding a small cylinder in the middle, selecting the face and going to the side with X-ray mode on, you can Control plus to extrude it out. And on top of that, a subdivision surface modifier, always smoothing things a bit. Now, when it comes to fruits like this, you always want to be messing around with the proportional editing tool to add imperfections, because no fruit is perfect and it will just feel more real. Now, when it comes to texture painting, and especially a sphere, you want to be adding 3 or 4 edge loops and then marking them as seams and then unwrapping the faces. Essentially, in order to make a good looking fruit, we are painting the model with real life images. These images usually include the side and top view. Usually the side and top view is enough to paint a full 360 of the model. With the brush tool, slowly painting in the texture onto the model. we're done with the texture paint, we save the image to bring in as a diffuse texture in the materials. You also should plug in the color into the roughness with a color ramp to have more control, as well as plugging the texture into a bump map and then into the normal, because this will really make it look good. Again, all the other fruits and vegetables are made similarly, so I'll just go through some interesting ones. For example, to make an onion, all you have to do is just squish it a bit, and with proportional editing, bring out the top and bottom. Here, you can extrude random parts to make that like onion feeling. Again, these images can be found on the internet. There's millions of images that you can use from. But if you have this food at home, you can also take personal photos. Even better, you have more control. Peppers are also really interesting because they have like these indented corners. To do that, you bring out the top and bottom to more of a pepper shape, and then selecting 4 edges and corners, turning off proportional editing, you want to just scale down just a little bit. Shade smooth and subdivision surface should do the trick. And then you just add in a similar thing, Control plus, and yeah. Carrots are surprisingly easy too. It's literally just a cube extruded, scaled down with a subdivision surface modifier, and boom, you have a carrot. I used a knife tool to cut out this part here so it can look a little bit better. Having 2 marked seams to the structure should do the trick. And it's all about painting that thing, setting up the material. A cabbage is actually the easiest thing I've ever made. It's literally just a squished sphere. Of course, don't forget proportional editing to have those imperfections. Unwrap and you start painting that thing. The bump to this cabbage adds a lot of detail. Also, a really good tip for this cabbage is to add a displace modifier and then creating a texture that is a distorted noise. And all you do is just reduce the strength of that until you get like a good looking cabbage. If you want to have more fruits and vegetables without putting as much effort, you can just mess around in the materials as well. Adding in an RGB curve and then messing around the color just gives a red pepper instead of a green one. Same thing with onions, adding a hue saturation, just messing around with the value, saturation, and hue. And then you have a white onion. And now it's time to place all the fruits in place. And a really good way to do this without wasting a lot of time is to use rigid body simulations. Add rigid body to the fruit, add rigid body to the fruit stand, except it's passive and the shape is set to mesh. Now listen to me, every time you duplicate, make sure you use Alt-D, not Shift-D, because Shift-D will kill your computer. Alt-D will just tell Blender to use the same information without wasting memory. A really good organizing tip is to move all of your fruits to a separate collection, and then with that selected, you can go to Object, Rigid Body, Apply Transformation, and then Rigid Body Remove, and then now they're in that position. You can almost definitely duplicate these grouped fruits to use over and over, as long as you differentiate them a bit by moving some of them around, rotating. To make a basket is simply just a cube with a missing face, adding a lot of edge loops, beveling that a little bit, selecting the faces, extruding along individual, and then insetting a little bit, deleting that. Give it a nice plastic texture or something, and then just place it where you want. Now, something about rigid body simulations is they tend to be really janky with non-spherical objects, and it takes a lot of time to mess around with the settings and to get something right. So alternatively, I would suggest placing these non-spherical elements by hand, just to save time and make it convenient. Be sure to set up a camera so you can start to see the perspective and composition. Again, you can also add proportional editing to these baskets, as well as randomizing the position and rotations of these to give it an offset. To have more control over the depth of field, you want to create an empty, and then in the camera turn on depth of field, and then focus on that empty. And now you can animate the position of that empty, and the focus will follow. The rest is pretty much up to you and how you want your composition to look. You can just reuse fruit groups, create interesting environments, create variations, just do your thing. And, you know, sooner or later you're gonna have fruit stand with a lot of fruits and vegetables. Now, a big problem I faced was when I tried to duplicate everything with Alt-D to create a background, I would get this memory error, really big memory error. It was a big thing. I couldn't render at all. So I had to figure out a better way to simplify the geometry. And what I ended up doing was I isolated that background part and then I just rendered a still image of that instead. And then what I'm doing here is I'm just creating another low poly version of this background fruit stand right here, just to vaguely represent it. And then in the shading tab, I'll just bring up that image render and then go to the camera, project from view, and then line it up. This usually gives a pretty good looking result. Make sure to use emission instead of principal BSDF, and it looks pretty good from the camera's perspective, not so much from others' perspective, but it works really well for background elements. Get all that color information with no extra memory usage. Then I just went around modeling some simple cardboard boxes to put around the scenes, duplicated the baskets to put around, put some fruits in. I then added this red tent thing to make it feel more of like a market. And for the backgrounds, I actually used this shop image that I just extruded a little bit, as well as a night market image in the distance for the depth of field. And all of this just helps to contextualize the background and surroundings of the fruit stands, makes it all feel like it's in one place. The lights are the easiest thing to model. They're just cylinders scaled down, with a metal texture and an emission texture, and you got your light. And finally, these two front baskets also add a little bit of parallax to the scene. And that is pretty much how you create your own little fruit stand environment. There's a lot of experimenting and creative thoughts that go into it. I'll show you my render passes when I originally first created this scene, and you can see how I progressed from creating each fruit and vegetables into having a well-rounded environment and all. And yeah, I'd say with a little bit of compositing, it came out pretty well. Oh yeah, by the way, this is Cycles, and this is Eevee. It's crazy. This animation is Eevee as well. Like, Eevee is pretty impressive sometimes. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this breakdown video. Also, subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. And I have many more cool shots coming up that I want to create. So I'll see you until then.